5-minute English lesson. Phrases for restaurants. Welcome to your 5-minute English lesson. Today, you will learn useful English phrases for restaurants. Each phrase is numbered and followed by an example showing how it is used. Let's begin. 1. Table for two, please. For example, you say this to the host when you enter a restaurant with one other person. 2. Do you have a reservation? For example, the host asks this to check if you booked a table in advance. 3. Yes, I have a reservation under my name. For example, you say this when your name is on the reservation list. 4. Can we sit by the window? For example, you ask this if you want a table with a view. 5. Can I see the menu, please? For example, you ask this when you are ready to look at the food options. Now let's move on to ordering food. 6. What do you recommend? For example, you ask this when you want the waiter's suggestion. 7. What are today's specials? For example, you ask this to hear dishes that are not on the regular menu. 8. I'd like the chicken, please. For example, you say this when choosing your main dish. 9. I'll have the vegetarian option. For example, you say this if you do not eat meat. 10. Can I have this without onions? For example, you say this when you want to remove an ingredient. 11. Can you make it less spicy? For example, you say this if the food is too spicy for you. 12. Can I see the drinks menu? For example, you ask this when you want to order a drink. 13. I'll have still water, please. For example, you say this when you want water without bubbles. 14. Can I get this to go? For example, you say this if you want to take your food with you. 15. Can I have an extra plate? For example, you ask this when you are sharing food. Now let's practice asking questions during the meal. 16. What ingredients are in this dish? For example, you ask this if you have allergies or dietary preferences. 17. Do you have gluten-free options? For example, you ask this if you cannot eat gluten. 18. Is this vegetarian? For example, you ask this to check if the dish contains meat. 19. Can you explain what this is? For example, you ask this if you don't recognize a dish on the menu. 20. How long will the food take? For example, you ask this when you want to know the waiting time. Next, phrases for after the meal. 21. Everything was delicious. For example, you say this to compliment the food and service. 22. Could we have the bill, please? For example, you say this when you are ready to pay. 23. Can I pay with card? For example, you ask this if you don't have cash. 24. Can we split the bill? For example, you ask this when paying separately with others. 25. Keep the change. For example, you say this when leaving a tip. Finally, some polite expressions. 26. Excuse me. For example, you say this to politely get the waiter's attention. 27. Thank you very much. For example, you say this after receiving help or service. 28. That's perfect. For example, you say this when everything is correct. 29. Everything is okay. For example, you say this when the waiter checks on you. 30. Have a great day. For example, you say this when leaving the restaurant. Great job. You have completed your 5-minute English lesson for restaurants. Practice these phrases whenever you eat out. They will help you speak English with confidence. Subscribe for your next 5-minute English lesson.